Hello, everyone, and good whatever wonderful moment of this day you are enjoying on your time zones as you are watching or listening to us live now, or if you stumble upon the recording later on. Welcome to the first panel of our February series, and we will be spending the next hour talking about the art of influence. My name is Minola Jacques. I will be your co host for the next hour or so, and then you are in for a treat um, throughout the month. We have Jessa with us backstage, and we have an amazing lineup of speakers. I see the comments already pouring in, and please keep them coming. If nothing else, do let us know where you're connecting from. That will help us travel vicariously around the world. Now, Jessa, let's try and make the most out of our time today. Please bring the speakers on the stage. And while they get used to seeing their faces next to each other, what I will do, I will just wholeheartedly encourage everybody in the audience. Consider this conversation as much yours as it is our panelists. So, whatever question we ask amongst ourselves, do drop your own stories, your own opinions, your own interpretations. It's always a great way to keep the community learning from each other. And also, if you have questions, I at least will keep an eye on the comments. I know some of the panelists will do as well. And help us make this a meaningful time for everybody. So, enough of my intro blabathon. What I will do, I will give the space to you. Just reminding everybody, the panel today is The Art of Influence, Amplifying HR's Organizational Impact Through Influence. So, very easy. The first round, I will pass the e-mic around as you appear on my screen, clockwise, and I will ask you to first shortly introduce yourselves. And also, I am curious, what is your own version of what influence means, and what is that perspective that you put into the outline of our conversation today? Stephanie, it's been too long since I saw you on my screen. It's a joy to see you again.
Manola, it's great to see you as well. Lots has happened. It's been about a year since we connected. All of this goes live now. It's a little bit daunting. It used to be that you pre-recorded us, and I kind of missed that. Oops, we could try again take. But I am still coming to you from here in the Catskill Mountains in New York. What has changed is that I am currently in between roles. So this is my only focus for today. So it's kind of nice to be able to not represent an organization at the moment, but just represent my own thoughts and past experiences.
Wonderful. And what is the influence flavor that you bring today into the conversation?
Sure. So I come from the HR operations background as opposed to the HR business partner background. So, from that leadership perspective, I am often coaching and mentoring a team that sees themselves as being very tactical rather than strategic. And it has been a passion of mine to encourage them to reach outside of those bounds and recognize that they have just as much influence within the organization in their messaging and in their interactions as anyone else who's in a more formally advisory role. And that's really what I'd like to talk about more and explore.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. Christy, welcome. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Yeah, good to be here. So Christy Politic, I'm from the other side of the US, just outside of Portland, Oregon, from Stephanie. Also love the diversity of the panel because Stephanie, while you come from more the operations side, I've spent 20 years really on the business partner side of HR. I got into HR because it seemed like the fastest route to influence good, positive change within the business. So I love that we've got different perspectives here around the table. Most of my experience has been in the construction industry specifically, but we all know influencing leaders isn't industry specific at all. Recent Change also have the opportunity to lead a startup, Builder Facts, on how to work and support our construction craft employees to help give them a voice. So it's really amplify their voice within the industry. So yeah, happy to be here.
Thank you so very much. And Lucy, welcome.
Hi, hey, good to be here, Manila. Thank you very much for hosting. My name is Lucy Georgiadis. I am British, as you can hear. I actually lived in San Francisco for 9 years, and now I'm in Miami for the last 3 years or so. So I'm on the East Coast of the States. Why I'm interested in influence, I think, so I've been coaching leaders, CEOs, execs, managers of all levels for the last 13 years. So I've done thousands of hours of coaching and training. And so I'm coming from a different perspective from Stephanie and Christy again, where I'm on the training and the coaching side, and I'm in lots and lots of different companies, my team's in lots of different companies. And we often get asked to really help teams with how to be influential. Our buyers are HR and people teams, and we help them a lot with how to be more influential in their organizations and how to particularly influence executive teams and C-suites in order to get their initiatives through and really get the budgets they need and the buy-in they need to make their programs that they want to roll out really successful. So our whole motto at Elevate Leadership, we really want to help managers be the kind of manager that they would want to work for. And we're very passionate about making sure that we reach as many managers as possible to help them be as influential as they can be as well. So it's a big part of our content to help people think about how they come across, how they align with people, how they can be influential and really get their points across. So happy to be here to talk from that perspective.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, making our panel whole and wholesome, Alex. It's quite a treat because I don't
know if I'd call myself wholesome, but we'll go with that just for the sake of it.
This is a treat.
Thank you, Noah. Well, it's good to know I've already found out I have something in common with each of the panelists. Lucy, I'm half British, half Swiss, and born and raised in Hong Kong. Christy, I'm also on the West Coast in Los Angeles. And Stephanie, I'm coming off a sabbatical and doing some fractional work. So I can see some common threads throughout. So I'm Alex Seiler. My background is as a chief people officer. I'm also a startup advisor to 3 different startups, currently doing fractional work for one of them, which is called When Insurance. They're a AI health advocate that is an alternative to Cobra. And I would say for me, influence has been a lot at that chief people officer level. So it's really been about convincing people of my ideas without them even knowing that I was trying to convince them of those ideas. And then the other thing has been really understanding the push and pull that exists with different leaders. Each leader can only handle so much change. So through working with different leaders, figuring out what that level of change really is. So I'm excited to dive into these topics and love the diversity of the panel as well. So really happy to be here.
How wonderful. And thank you, everybody, for taking the time and the energy to be here. And just to close the diversity of the panel, I am actually hosting you from Switzerland, which is my 17th country in 20 years. So I call myself a serial immigrant by now. Before we dive very, very deep into the topic of influence and specifically HR influence, I would really invite all of you to take a few minutes and talk a little bit about what does HR organizational impact look like? What should it look like? What should it feel like? Especially if we look at everything that we are navigating at the moment. And what I will do, I will consider this practice for the unmuting competition. So I will leave the question there, and then whoever practiced, please step in, and the other ones just build your own conversation from there. Who's today's pioneer? Let's see. Christy.
I'll jump in on this one. So as I look at HR organizational impact, I really think it's the ability, HR is not always and often not expected to be business focused, right? Not operational focused for where the business is going. HR truly has that ability to be at the table, to be in the conversations, to, if you will, marry how to structure an organization, how to support an organization to go meet those business needs. And so it's really be able to drive that together and have that impact on the more internal organization level, while more often than not, the business operations is focused on that external side of thing. And so really being able to come together, it can have an incredible impact to go meet those business needs more successfully. Really.
I'm going to chime in on there because Christy said some stuff that just triggered some things in my mind, which was that, you know, I never see myself as a people leader. I see myself as a business leader who happens to have a specialization in people. And I think we need to reframe the discussion in that way with business leaders so they fully understand organizational impact as well. And so I think what can be dangerous that I've seen in certain organizations is where you start seeing HR as a point solution versus how it actually interacts with every other function within the business. And when you start seeing the people or the HR function like that, you start fully understanding its organizational impact as well.
Alex, oops, sorry.
Go ahead, Stephanie.
Let's go Stephanie and then Lucy.
Okay. So I hear so loudly, and it resonates so strongly with me what you just said about being part of the business with a specialty in people. And no organization operates without its people. And so if we are in the business of propping people up, of taking away the concerns that drive them away from what their ultimate organizational goals are, and creating sort of that gearing within the organization to move smoothly and to transition from organizational goal and objective to organizational goal and objective, and really understanding what drives each part of the business. So it's not just enough that we know benefits or we know payroll or we understand how to coach a manager through a tough performance issue. We also need to understand how each one of those organizational functions brings the overall corporate goals to light, so that we can help empower everyone to do their best and to achieve the corporate goals overall.
And I'll just add, I think everyone said it very well indeed, but just one extra little thing is that I will say that I'm hopeful as the perception of what HR does in companies changes, so too does the number of much more senior people teams and HR professionals at the top of organizations. Because when HR works the best, they have representation on the executive team or in the C-suite, and it's quite hard to have the kind of influence that you really want when you're a few levels below that and you're just sort of trying to like get some attention. And so anyway, that would be my sort of hope for influence as we go forwards over the coming kind of decade or so, is to get as many HR senior leaders through as possible and help them get to those very top rungs, because it isn't every company that has that kind of strong HR and people representation at the top levels.
Yeah, and I would just add to what Lucy said, that you also need to have a CEO and a leadership team that's willing to be on board and enable that kind of change. If they're fostering a sort of what I call a quote unquote old school mentality, it's going to be like pushing a rock up a hill at that organization. So it's kind of like, it's great if you've got a fantastic progressive people leader, but if you equally don't have a progressive CEO and leadership team, it all falls flat very, very quickly.
One reason why I absolutely love the diversity of perspectives in this panel is because I was thinking about a question while I was getting ready to enter this conversation. And I was thinking, are all HR influences created equal? And basically you said, no, not really. So I would really invite all of you and each of you to share a few examples of how HR influence translates differently across HR roles, HR levels, maybe HR function slices, for lack of a better word. And Stephanie, I would ask you to lead us into this.
Okay, you are really testing my unmute skills this morning. So from my perspective, it's a lot about role modeling. It's how do we interact with each other, and how do we put our ideas and creativity forward within the organization. So something as simple as saying, okay, the senior leadership has determined what our culture principles are and what our corporate values are, and how do we incorporate that into our service delivery on a regular basis, and how do we encourage others to incorporate that into their service delivery on a regular basis. So an example of that I've used in the past is with our communications for open enrollment. It's not just about, hey, did you log on and did you tick the boxes to make sure that you still have health insurance? It's about what wellness opportunities do we have, and how are we communicating that the corporate principle of focus, team, and collaboration is all part of something as simple and as tactical as an open enrollment function. And you incorporate your wellness week to go along with that open enrollment, so that you're encouraging people to take a step back and look at, why do I have PTO? Why do I have an EAP available? Why do I have these third-party point solutions of various wellness and whole life benefits that are incorporated into my day-to-day activity? And how does that allow me to then put aside my personal worries and focus on the business goals?
I saw not thoughtful nodding on the screen, so I'm sure someone will jump in. Alex.
I'll jump in. So I think that what's really interesting that I've seen in my career is, particularly for me and relative to having managed many different teams, is like the difference in maybe how bold you feel the more senior you get. I really care very little about not sharing my opinion now. I will share it at any given opportunity. However, there needs to be a recognition that when you're earlier on in your career, there's still that fear that dominates, especially in maybe what you may consider a where there's a hierarchy or a certain level of where it's harder to be open and frank. So I think seniority and comfort level in your career can make a difference. I also think patience is really important. You've got to recognize that depending on who you're working with, you're not necessarily going to get to the solution as quickly as you want to get to it. It really depends what kind of journey they've been on. So I know one of the questions I think that I saw come through was 3 skills that you consider for influence. One is definitely patience. The other is definitely socializing ideas behind the scene before you actually roll out a concept or idea, because by the time you do it, everyone's pretty much on board, right? So that's always my approach when I start in a new organization. And I'd say the third is really mindset shift. Be prepared that you're going to work with people that don't really understand your value, and part of your job is going to be to convince them of the value that you bring rather.
Yeah, to jump into the conversation on this one, I think as we look at the levels of HR influence and kind of what that could look like depending on function, role, level within the organization, I think it's important to think that there are some influences that we're trying to drive, right? To drive impact at a more macro level or at a more organizational level, where you need that seat at the table that Lucy was talking about, right? So you don't default back to that old school. Alex, kind of going back to what you said as well. And, and that's like changing to a culture of influence, or really driving, mental health and total wellness within an organization. And there's different levels within the organization. I saw in one of the comments, we've got one of our attendees literally headed to their first HR position ever, which I love, right? And someone else asking about, how do we support, blue collar employees? Sometimes influencing just that one person, right? How to treat an employee better or differently through a performance management, right? Really those one-on-one relationships that are just the small incremental changes. Because as we look at it, ProSci is a big leader in change management. Organizations don't actually change, people change. And you've got to get enough individuals and enough people to change and drive that behavior for an organization to change. And that happens at all levels throughout an organization, whether you're in operations or business partner or leadership or what have you. It's important to keep that in mind as well.
Well, I'll jump in lastly. I think that where we're coming from day to day is similar to what Christy was saying here. Like, how do you really drive behavioral change? Because most of the initiatives that at least I'm designing and putting forward with companies are, well, how can we get employees or how do we get executive teams to change their behavior to drive impact, essentially, or to be happier humans, or to manage people better? And I think when you're looking at when all things are not created equal when it comes to influence, the things that I see that make the largest impact across the organizations are when initiatives are very multi-threaded. And I think Stephanie was kind of alluding to this, where instead of just having a management training program, you're also thinking about, well, how does that work with your DE&I policy? And how does that work with your mental health and well-being policies? And how does that work with the ERGs you're putting together? And so that when you wanting to think about how to change the behavior of employees or change the behavior of executive teams, you're looking at the program from all different angles. And I think when programs fail, from where I've been sitting at least anyway, it's when they're quite singular threaded and they either don't have the executive sponsorship or they're not all encompassing enough to really help. And it's about reminding people, I suppose, of all those different things that are available. Are you top of mind? How are you marketing it internally? And the marketing of it internally becomes much easier when you really pull in all those other facets into those kind of programs. And starting with, as Alex was saying, is sort of surveying your employees and working out, like, what do people really want? Do you have people on board before you even roll it out?
Lucy, just to jump in on that one more minute, I know you're going to take us. That was even one of the questions that I saw pop up is, how does HR interact with IT or finance or what have you? And Lucy, like, it's a brilliant point, because the most effective organizational change truly is organizational. Maybe driven by HR, maybe not, right? But it's really through that spread of those networks and building those relationships, whether structurally they exist or you just kind of make them happen, right? Go find the friend, right, in those other functions that can help you drive that change from a network perspective, so it's not that singular focus.
I would also add to that, I think we need to stop separating ourselves from other functions, because it already makes you feel like a silo, and start considering us cross-functional teams that work together, right? And that's why I'll use finance as an example. There's always going to be a push-pull, like I said, or give and take in any relationship, And when I go in to work with, say, a CFO, for example, I'm always like, I'm going to need some investments, but I know you're going to need some savings. So let's walk this talk together, right? So it's kind of understanding that balance, and like any relationship, there's got to be a give and take in it.
I was thinking back to a very recent conversation. I think it was last week, if my memory serves me right, in a panel about the mindful HR leader. And we talked about presence, and we talked about the intention behind being present, and how that can be a driver for influence. And Lucy, I know this is a topic near and dear to your heart, so I would ask you to lead us into this part of the conversation around how can presence help us in achieving HR influence?
Okay, thank you. So, presence. We talk about this a lot with our HR teams and with our people who attend our seminars and workshops and things. And the reason why it makes a massive difference is because people do make a judgment about how competent you are in a matter of seconds. And so it shouldn't matter, but it really does matter how you come across. And And especially if we're trying to influence senior leadership or any employee, I suppose, across the organization, I suppose how we're being, it's not just like presence, like, are we filling a room? But it's kind of like, are we present in those kind of conversations? Are we really listening to what's being said? And to Alex's point, are we being seen as this real sort of cross-functional partner as well? And I think there are a few things which have a really big influence on how our presence is influenced and how we show up and how we look. And we talk a lot about this. There's basically three, especially if you're on Zoom, there are three things. There's like how you're positioned, there's your sound and your lighting. But I think how you're positioning yourself physically, as well as how you're positioning what you're saying, is really important. And when we think about how we come across over Zoom, and I know a lot of us are all around the world, our teams are global, a lot of our stakeholders are in a different continent, different country, different time zone. And so the medium that we're sitting on now just has a really big impact in how we come across and how people are going to listen to us and whether they think what we have to say is worth listening to, worth hearing. And so I'd say these are super obvious small things, but even though we've this many years past the start of COVID, it's amazing how often I'm still giving people like feedback on this or like pointing things out to folks. But positioning is massive. So look, if you see like how my head is taking up about a third of the screen, if you flipped me this way, I'd sort of fill the screen with the other two pieces of myself here and here, where my top of my head is about an inch away from the top so that you can see my arms, my shoulders, you can see the top of my chest. And when I gesticulate, you can really see my hands. And that makes a really big difference how present you are and how you come across, even just where you're sitting on the screen, making sure that your camera is at the right height. And the second part, which I did mention then a little bit, is how we're using our hands to gesticulate. And actually, there's a lot of interesting research that shows that how you gesticulate actually really helps the other person process what you're saying. And it really aids in comprehension when people can see your hands. So when you're presenting to folks and you're talking about your ideas and you're trying to influence them and sell an idea that you have or a program that you want to roll out, making sure that you're present with your hands is really big. It provides a lot of social cues. It really builds rapport as well. And then lastly, of course, is eye contact. And I know that this is hard when you've got split screens and things like that, but I'm often finding that I'm having conversations with people where they're kind of looking down like this. It's so obvious. We've been doing this for years and years. But when you look directly into the camera, that's when you're making that eye contact. And that's when you're coming across in a way that's really going to make people listen to what you're saying and sit up and hear the content of what you're saying as well. Anyway, I'll stop there so others can jump in. But like, as you can see, I really love the whole presence piece of it. Hopefully those really small body language tips will help.
Thank you so much, Lucy. Presence for HR influence. Who would like to add something?
So I'm happy to jump in because I have a completely different perspective on it. A lot of the feedback that I have gotten within the organizations that I work in, and I do come from a financial services background, is that for so long, HR has sat separate and apart from everyone else, and that HR is not approachable, and that HR just doesn't understand what's happening on a daily basis. And they're always so surprised that I set up coffee dates or that I walk and use a printer on a different floor intentionally. And those are just little things that we can be doing on a regular basis. Come out of that safety shell and not worry so much about, am I going to let a secret out the door that should have been kept within the HR space? Because the sphere of influence is really much greater when you're involved on a day-to-day basis.
We have a competition for the hot seat of going last.
I'll go first then. Christy, I don't want to go last right now. Well, I'll take it. So to what Lucy said, first of all, I'll say, and there's also not, I think Lucy was really focused on like an individual meeting or interaction in terms of being present. I think something I've also seen be successful is group meetings, where you really try to start a meeting out by, doing some sort of meditation or some sort of just kind of centering yourself in preparation for the meeting, because we also have to recognize that we come from other meetings and we've got a lot of noise going on in our heads. So in order to actually be present for those meetings, we need to remove that. So we're solely focused on what's going on at that particular juncture. You know, I also think as leaders, what I found is interesting as well, and I'm curious whether Stephanie has, not to put you on the spot, Stephanie, because you already said it, but as somebody who's just coming off a sabbatical and taken some time to myself, it's also been great to have the time to practice mindfulness and be more present. And I think sometimes when we're in the thick of managing teams and doing that, we try our best to do that very well, but it's easier said than done. So I think being present when you have the time and the self-reflection is much easier than when you've got a million different things coming at you. And now I'll leave it to Christy.
I feel like I should get a trophy or like a badge for going last on this one. Because I mean, truly, I say that because I mean, you all have such a brilliant ideas, right, of how to be present, and whether that's physically, right, mindful, which of course, Lucy, I'm now like, okay, making sure I'm looking at the camera and thinking about where I am on the screen. So, you know, thank you. But I think, you know, translate some of that to even in person, right? There's some things to think about, right? If it's a meeting space, where are you physically in the room, right? What are you physically doing? So Lucy, you're talking about like that physical presence on camera. What about that physical presence when you're in the room with someone? Are you on the phone? Are you sitting up alert, right? What is that body language tells so much. And Alex did kind of, you know, Stephanie, kind of that mental mindfulness. We can go from a performance management conversation to a compensation conversation to a wellness conversation. I mean, it's like this depending on the day, right? And so think about what do you need for yourself to be able to pivot from one to another. Do you need to build in that break? Do you need to go grab a cup of coffee? Are you able to switch very quickly? What is it that you need, because it's different for everyone, to transition from one conversation to the next so you can be there in that moment, because that's what you're expecting and desiring from everybody else in the room as well, right? Whether that room is a virtual room or an in-person room. What do you need to kind of manage that physical presence of yours as well as the mental presence so that you're there?
And just to add to that, Christy, I'd say you're right when we're because sometimes you're having meetings on Zoom, sometimes you're in person, but also thinking about your body language and you're sitting in that room where you've positioned yourself in the chair, how you've positioned yourself in a chair. And when I did a lot more in-person stuff, I'd see this a lot where people would come in, they'd make themselves quite small, they'd sit maybe right in the corner. And it's like, no, if you've got things to say, you need to position yourself in the room so that you're there physically, because it is much easier to get into a conversation without interrupting if you're right there and you can lean forward. People pick up on those body language cues to know that you want to say something next so that you get your turn in the conversation. And you know, just be careful where your feet are as well. Like, I know I'm a huge proponent of feet. So if you're sitting with your feet turned in, even under a table, it'll make you feel quite different and it'll pull the rest of your body in. It'll pull your elbows in, it'll pull your knees in, it'll pull your shoulders in, and you're making yourself quite small. And given that we all pick up on very subconscious cues as humans, it won't go consciously noticed, but it goes kind of unconsciously noticed by everybody else in the room too. So making sure that your feet are turned out will pull everything else out, your shoulders out, your elbows out, and you'll be sort of ready and in the conversation.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. I saw you unmuted there for a few seconds. Do you wanna come back?
Nope, completely forgotten what I was thinking.
It will definitely come back. I just had a quick look at the watch, and we are a couple of minutes into the second half of our conversation, and I think it's time to keep myself honest to a promise I made myself late last year. And those of you who have seen a few panels in the meantime probably knew that this was coming. What would you add to everything that we have discussed until now, or what would you especially highlight if we apply all this conversation within the context of an HR function of one? Because there are people in our audience who live that reality day in, day out. And influence sounds oftentimes like a team sport. So what would you highlight from what we've discussed? What would you add for people in the audience who are an HR function of one?
I'll start. Oh.
Please, Alex.
Go on, Alex.
I was going to say, this could apply technically, though, obviously, to bigger teams, but I think it becomes more magnified if you're a team of one. It's not the best analogy, but be careful the hills that you choose to die on. Okay, like not every hill is worth dying on, right? So you have to pick and choose, or another analogy, where you're going to use your silver bullet, right? Because at the end of the day, what may seem really important to you, if it's not important to a lot of other people, is not going to get the attention that it deserves, and you just need to move on. The other thing I would say is, if you've said something 2 or 3 times and it's going nowhere, move on, because you're just beating a dead horse. Oh God, I'm using such bad analogies today, but the point comes across. So those are the ones that I would highlight.
Hopefully that horse didn't die on a hill, but other than that, we're safe. Okay.
I would say that if you are an HR team of one and you don't have a team, find your team, because there are people in the organization that will champion what you're doing, and they might not be the same person for every initiative that you're rolling out, but there are people who care, whether those are DEI initiatives, whether those are management training initiatives, whether those are onboarding initiatives, whatever it is. And those champions that you have across the organization are so valuable, but then they are there. And so it's about finding who those people are, and making sure that you lean on them and recruit them for kind of internal marketing purposes and for support purposes and for executive leadership and sponsorship purposes. They don't always have to be the executives. They can be people lower down the organization. They can be other vocal leaders who people really look up to as well, who are tenured in the organization, or who maybe are real cultural bastions for the organization.
Yeah, Stephanie, you want to take this one?
Christy and then Stephanie.
Yep. Again, just continuing to amplify what Alex and Lucy are talking about, is that especially when you're an HR department of one, the art of influence is almost more important, right? Alex mentioned earlier in our conversation around pre-socializing ideas and utilizing that technique to, Lucy, to jump on your point of how do you find those people who are going to help you champion it? That's through that pre-socialization, right? Kind of float some ideas out there, see where they're sticking, get those folks to take and run it, because you don't have the time or the bandwidth to do it all, right? The world, you are not going to get a badge of honor for doing all the things all the time, right? Really, where you can make that difference is influencing others to help. And sometimes it's influencing, and sometimes just identifying those right people. And I know the question came up, and Lucy, you talked about a little bit, is how do you find them, right? Who are the folks that people are listening to? It's not always a C-suite position, right? There are people in the organization that are getting heard, are getting listened to, that just kind of pull an organization with them. Find them, and then utilize their talents, their skills, their relationships within the organization to help you drive the change that you want to drive throughout the organization.
And can I just add to Christy's point, the pre-socialization piece, like you really hit the nail on it, in that through that process, you also weed out what Lucy was talking about, who are the natural people that are going to be in your corner, that you really, I don't want to say have to sell your ideas to, but you kind of already got on board, but also who are going to be the tough nuts to crack, frankly, and you're going to have to spend a lot more time really trying to finesse those influencing skills with. But when you kind of get a win with those individuals, it's going to feel huge as well.
So my 2 cents on this is seek out a mentor within the organization who is well respected and well networked, and use that to facilitate that whole concept of pre-socialization. So if you already have someone in your corner, you become a team of 2 instead of a team of 1, and their sphere of influence comes into play as well.
I love how very early on there was energy in this conversation to touch on skills. And I don't want to go back and repeat those. So my question is, can each of you think of one skill that is outside of the usual suspects, but is particularly powerful and meaningful when it comes to building and nurturing influence as an HR professional. And I will give you a few seconds to think about this. In the meantime, I will welcome those who joined us a little bit later. And before we get these questions popping up, I will anticipate them. And yes, this conversation is being recorded. So you can always go back and re-listen or recommend it either through our LinkedIn space or hackinghrlab.io. So, unusual skills that help with influence. Christy.
I'm not losing the unmute challenge again. I think for me, it's understanding the fundamentals of change management. And it's the people side of change. And I mentioned ProSci earlier. Switch is one of my favorite books by Dan and Chip Heath. There's a ton of resources out there, but it's understanding those different levers that you can pull to help drive that change and influence from the people side. And it's not always at the top of a list, right? So I think that's the one that I would bring to the table that's key to success. And again, tons of resources out there around that change management piece.
My change manager heart is doing a happy dance right now. Thank you.
As they should be doing a happy dance.
Stephanie.
So much in that same, I'm going to jump on getting off of mute before I lose my thought again. I actually think that it's truly your listening skills, and it's not just listening for what's being said. It's listening for what's not being said and for what those nonverbal cues are within an organization. So where is the focus being driven to? And being able to take that into account and formulate whatever proposition you're trying to drive forward through that what's being said and not said approach.
Lucy, you and me.
Go on then, you go.
So my one is going to be financial acumen. So here's the thing. I think that, and I actually got this feedback recently from, the startup that I'm working with, which is, Alex, you have a very good understanding of, business finances. And we realize not all chief people officers do. Sometimes we have to pull in CFOs. And I have seen that to be the case, that I've seen very strong CPOs do it. And I've seen CPOs that it's not such a strength for. But, in an era where I now have friends who frankly have worked at businesses where they've run out of money, I'm not saying that obviously their impact would have changed the direction of that company, but you're at least invited to the party because they recognize that you understand that the finances of the business drive the business. So I'd say financial acumen is huge.
Yep, for sure. And we're helping our HR teams a lot with that kind of thing. And I suppose my one's relatively similar-ish, which is analytics, being able to understand data. And it's not something that I think most HR people, hopefully I'm not too naughty to say, that would be their first primary skill. But if you're putting something together, and especially at the moment where budgets are quite tight and businesses are going under and having to make really tough choices and tough calls and cuts, you've got to be able to look to a data perspective to what success looks like. How do we actually measure ROI on what we're putting forwards? And really understand how that data works, which is very linked to what Alex was saying as well. And I think, and that's hard. It is really hard because it's not everyone's cup of tea, and it's not everyone's kind of primary strength either, but really understanding how to analyze that data, draw inferences from it, show what the business impact is going to look like from a numbers perspective wherever you can, is going to really, really help you out. I particularly like Cecilia's comment as well, that's gone up now, but she said acting, which I thought was a great one. Yep, not a normal skill for HR, but maybe a useful one.
I've been thinking about this question since I saw you on the screen, but then something that Alex said prompted me to put a different spin to it. So please blame it on him. I was going to ask all of you, as you've been on your own journeys of building and nurturing your influence, what was your biggest learning? But then what Alex said about fully growing into the space of his own voice and his own opinions, I am now tempted to ask all of you, what is your biggest unlearning about influence as you came through your career? And Alex, I will ask you to go first, but we can take a few seconds. Your biggest unlearning about influence.
Couldn't I go last because I provoked your thinking?
I can go. I have one.
Oh, yay, Lucy.
I'll save you from a fate worse than death on a hill. I think one big thing that I realized, and this is down, actually, I can't take any credit for this. This is Olivia Fox-Caban, for those of you who have heard of her or know her, is that being charismatic is totally a learned skill if you want to learn it. And whilst we've talked a lot about like influence in terms of like business cases and data and your influencers and finding your team and that kind of stuff, if you are interested in how to do that more, her book called The Charisma Myth is really fascinating, because I really believe that it's something that you're born with. Some people can do it, some people can't do it, and actually not the case. If you break it down into its component parts, she talks about charisma being a combination in equal parts of presence that we've already talked about, power. So, do you have something that other people need or that other people want to hear? And warmth as well, which is, are you a friend? So when you have presence, power, and warmth in equal combinations, that's when you come across as being really charismatic. And I had never thought of it like that before. So for those of you who feel like that's not your jam, this book will really help.
Thank you, Lucy. That's borderline unlearning and learning, but we will go with this. Stephanie, I see you unmuted.
So something that I believe it was Alex said earlier was, if you bring the same point forward multiple times and you're not getting the response that you need, let it go. And I think that's one of the biggest unlearnings for me is that bringing your passion to everything is probably not the most productive thing or productive way to be. And so learn to sort of temper it back a little bit. So it's a learning and an unlearning at the same time. It's way more important to build the consensus than it is to force the issue.
Yeah, not to necessarily duplicate, Stephanie, what you're talking about, but a little bit in that I've never been known for my patience, right? Still not. And, especially earlier in my HR career, like I want to take an organization from here to here because this is where we ought to be, right? And so like, how fast can we move there? And I think the biggest unlearning is to take it from here to here is not possible, right? It's understand where your organization is and take it step by step, right? Meet your organization where it is, because if you try to push too hard, you will get kicked to the curb, essentially, right? And so how do you take that step back, meet them where they are, and take it step by step? Because, think about it. You don't, finish a marathon and, like that. You take it one step at a time, right, to get you to where you need to be. And that's, organizational change and influence can be just the same.
Alex?
Well, I thank you, my fellow panelists, for giving me the time to think about what I was going to say. So I kind of have one slightly off of Christy and Stephanie, and then a second one that I guess is different. One is that, I earlier on in my career in particular, I wore my heart on my sleeve a lot and thought that equated to passion and would meant that it resonated with other people. But sometimes people just took that a different way, and either took it as Christy mentioned, impatience or aggression, so that was something I had to figure out how to channel and unlearn that, unlearn or learn combination that I can channel my passion in a different way and use my words in a different way that will not only help me grow, but also get to a better end result. And then the second one I would say is I'm a reformed perfectionist. So what I learn is that perfectionism is daunting. It is also, it's daunting and it doesn't work. And that a lot of the times you're better off getting an 8 out of 10 on something and moving 4 or 5 things forward than trying to finesse and get to a 10 out of 10 on one thing, because things will have passed you by in that time, and people will have got aggravated about how slow you're moving on that one thing when you could have rolled out a number of other things at the same time. So those would be my 2.
I see we're about 12 minutes away from saying goodbye, and this is very painful to say. And thank you so much for giving everybody in the audience so much energy and so much inspiration. And I was thinking, can we also give them some safety? Can you think of some pitfalls of the HR influence and how to stay safe from those? Maybe some early warning signs that things are off track. Do you have some scars? Do you have some stories? And I see some smiles and nodding. Oh, Christy, you become a champion of unmuting.
Hey, I can learn. I think that every HR professional has scars and burns and tough days, right? I think, to create that safety, goes back again to that concept of pre-socialization, right? How can you float ideas out in an organization, get some thoughts, get some insights from people? Because to really amplify what Alex was talking about earlier, is that's where you find your supporters, and that's where you find those pitfalls, right? How far are you going to go? Are you trying to bring something that's just completely against the culture of the organization that you're trying to do? And if so, is it worth it? Right? Listen to those early conversations, those warning signs, find those influencers in the organization and float it past them and get their thoughts. It still could be the right thing to go do, but then you know a bit more about what you're up against and you can be prepared for that rather than jump into the deep end blind. Right? Create that safety, get an idea of what's going, what best direction or best tack to take in that change through those early conversations where you're not also fully invested in it as well. That's a big thing, I would say.
I can give you a really fundamental one, and that is be humble enough to admit when you have ventured down a path or taken on a task that you failed at or made a mistake with, and ask for help in resolving it.
We have settled into a pattern here. We have the hot seat contestants coming up. Lucy being gracious, Alex.
I felt like Lucy saved me last time, so I feel like I should go last probably, unless Lucy wants me to go first.
No, I need to say I haven't been an HR professional, so I'm kind of like, oh, what have I seen? Like,
okay, I'm going to give you.
You go, because I may not even have one for you. Yeah.
Okay, don't worry, I've got plenty of scars. So, I would say that this is always such a hard one. I will share that I won't say the organization, but if you follow me on LinkedIn, then you'll be able to figure this out. I've shared it before. There was a point where I knew I had to leave an organization because I got feedback that specifically that, Alex, you like to hold people accountable, but this is not a culture where people like to be held accountable. And at that point, I knew that wasn't the culture for me. What I will tell you is at the time, I thought it was the most useless piece of feedback I'd ever received. But in taking time away and self-reflecting, it was actually the best piece of feedback. And it helped me understand what my non-negotiables are going into a safe environment. And non-negotiables meant being able to hold myself and other people accountable. And that's important in the art of influence as well. So that would be mine.
Oh, tricky. Okay. I'm gonna have to just give you, I suppose, an everyday life one. To have more psychological, I would say that, like, it's easy to feel especially in some cultures in organizations, that HR's opinion doesn't matter. And it does matter. And you do have the heartbeat, and you are the ones that have your pulse on the employees in the business more so than anybody else, because you hear so much more than any other department hears. And I think it's very easy for exec teams to forget that somehow, and therefore make you feel small, or make you feel like what you have to say isn't super important. Not all the time, but especially if you're a one-man band here, as on the call as an HR professional, and if you have a sense that something might be right or something might be off, then feel free to say it. Do speak up and say what you're seeing and hearing, because often when we bring data to a conversation, that's fantastic. But also when we bring qualitative things that we're hearing, a sense that we're getting, that's also very valuable insights for exec teams. And so I'd say don't feel worried about speaking up, especially when you really feel like something is right.
I am sure that as soon as you saw the title of this panel, something drove you to sign up, and there must have been something that is particularly personally meaningful for you regarding this topic. My next question is the open mic question. What is it that you really wanted to say today, and you just didn't have the opportunity until now to say it? Is there something that you want to add to this conversation? Is there something that you feel it's particularly meaningful and you want to highlight out of everything that you just shared? And I won't even call one of you to go first, because you seem to have figured out amongst yourself how you want to go. So what is something particularly meaningful to you that you want to leave with the audience today? Alex.
I'm unmuting. I would say what I'd leave with people is, as many times as you can get it right, you can also get it so wrong. And don't use that as a learning experience and helpful to aid you to get it right again in the future, right? Don't see that as a pitfall or something that holds you back in your career, because something that may even be your superpower, we all can make a mistake at times as well. So that's something I would say, and that's what resonated with me when I saw the title of this panel.
Thank you, Alex. Lucy, you want to go after Alex?
Yes, because I must either follow him or go before him. It's like, I can't think now. Yeah. Do you know, I think I said most of the things that I did want to say. I suppose this is more of a tactical thing because I'm Miss Practical. Something that I've seen some of our HR folks do recently, which I was like, oh, that's really cool. And I hadn't thought about it because I'd not sat directly in the seat before, was they were trying to work out how they could really demonstrate ROI for their initiatives that they were putting forwards. And they didn't have any good, they didn't have quite enough data in their organization, and it wasn't quite big enough. And they didn't really have enough allies to pull from either. And so they phoned a friend, and they used their HR network, which are extensive. Never have I been in groups of people who have more fantastic networking abilities than HR folks and people teams. And they put it out there. It's like, how can I demonstrate ROI on this particular initiative? And they got back so much great data from their peers on when they'd run similar initiatives and what the bottom line had been, what the business impact was, whether it even changed revenue or not, how it changed employee engagement surveys, all kinds of things. And they were able to make the most amazing business case, pulling from their peers in other organizations. And I think if you're feeling stuck with the data, or you're feeling stuck with demonstrating ROI, phone a friend, because they're all there to help, and they've got some great data at their fingertips.
Stephanie and Christy. Christy.
I'll save Stephanie the best for last. I think for me, as I think about, we've talked about so many wonderful, really great things during this conversation. I think for me, as we think about influence, it's important to remember, sometimes you feel like you might be, beating your head against a wall, right? You're headed, you've pre-socialized, you've found your ROI, you're going for it, and you're still for some reason, it's not working, right? For whatever reason. And that's when I'd encourage everyone to take a pause, take a step back. And sometimes there's like an end around, right? If you've been coming at it this way, okay, fine. And I'm trying to use my hands, Lucy, right? And make sure they're on camera. But if you're headed down a path one way and it's just not working, take that step back and see if there's a way to come at it from the side, right? And maybe it's, from both sides, right? You can double tackle. Now I'm mixing all my metaphors with climbing up a hill, right? But think about how can you go about it maybe in a different way if the way that you're really trying isn't working. If you know it's the right thing, you've got some buy-in, you've got some support, but something's not working, take that step back and look at it from this side. And often there's a way to approach it to really get to where you want to be, maybe a little bit longer of a path, but there's something off to the side that you could probably get to really help you get to where you think the organization needs to be.
Thank you, Christy. Stephanie.
So I think it's kind of a summarization of all of this. I think we need to really remain strong in our own personal understandings that we have the experience, we have the education, we have all of those data points and tools within our career arcs. And that if we take a step back and don't undervalue ourselves and lead with that thoughtfulness, that people will listen and people will understand that we are able to take into account all of that analysis, to take into account all of that networking capability, and to put all of that energy that we bring as people and compassionate care practitioners to those business challenges. And that's really where all of our superpowers lie, is in being able to assimilate and collate all of those various factors and create a cohesive approach.
Thank you all so very much. We are at our Dr. Seuss moment where we say, how did it get so late so soon? I keep saying that hacking HR hours, they're shorter than regular hours. The very, very last wrap up, mic drop round. And I do this with people that I work with on change and change topics, but I will use influence for change. If influence as a word didn't exist, what other one word would you use to convey the same meaning? I will give you a few seconds to think about it. We will go counterclockwise. So Alex, you will go first, and then we will wrap up with Stephanie. Please think about it. I will just say a wholehearted thank you to everybody in the audience. I hope I will get to welcome as many of you as possible tomorrow when we will be talking about the absolute love of my professional life, and that is stories and storytelling. And one word, influence doesn't exist. One word.
Convince.
Thank you. Lucy.
Align.
Wonderful. Christy.
Kind of want this wheel to keep spinning. I'm not sure I have one. I think I'll take Inspire from Misty, and brought that one up. The one I typically use is probably not so positive. So Misty, I'm borrowing yours.
Wonderful. So we have a +1 on Inspire. Stephanie.
Fascinate.
I love all these words. Thank you so very much. Also, thank you, Jessa, for helping us run this so smoothly. And take care, everyone, and happy influencing.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.